Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and putting me to this challenge of talking about a topic that is good for 20 hours and to cover this in 20 minutes. Just to catch up on some things that have been mentioned at least before, indirectly or directly. I refer to Athens. James talked about the conflicts that are involved. I have been recently, before I came to China, actually in Athens, and walked along these areas below the Acropolis and the Forum, and where you think, actually, you feel this spirit of unity of everything. And then actually you see as well, if you are a little bit attentive, what we think today about an ideal society, very inclusive, had been very exclusive in terms of there had been slavery, there had been violence, and there had been everything. We have to be always careful, I think, with all these classifications. Just a remark because I use them. Asia came up. Where is the border of Asia? So we have to be careful about this, and we have to think as well about the different options we may open with whatever we do. The one thing is we are talking about sports in terms of the citizen of the old ancient region, which had been a privileged class. Now that moved, I think, pretty much to the political citizen in terms of power structures, in terms of nation states, and to the market citizen. Meaning sports is very much about, are you in the market? If you have the money, if you have the resources, then you can play the game. Otherwise, it's a pretty tough situation at least, and you have to fight your way if you are good enough. My thesis is, in a way, that we are moving further, possibly, hopefully, and this is as well a task for us then, to the citizen that is emancipated, that it is participating, and there I think sports can be a useful tool. The reality of sports, outdoor sports, community sports, as Van Hong just mentioned it, as a potential. Second preliminary remark, what I want to talk about in this sense is social capital, but not in the traditional way of Bourdieu, but as a matter of a social capital bank, investment bank, if you want. This is what we have to look for, this is what we have to think for, I think, to see sports as an investment, not into individuals, this is true as well, but as a means of societies to develop emancipated, participating citizens. A large field, as I said, it would be good for 20 hours. One of the reasons why I agreed immediately and said I'm very pleased really to come when I heard the invitation, and I had been asked to say, what are you going to talk about, was that I just arrived, returned back to China, to Changsha, and seeing the students during their first week doing, as it had been said, some physical exercise. Now, coming from the West, seeing all these people with their earphones running across the campus and being individualized, rushing from one to the other lecture, and then seeing this contrast of whichever term you want to use, kind of collective action, activities with others, is a stark contrast, which I thought is simply remarkable. Nothing more. Because there are, of course, the other aspects involved, and there are not least involved things like rituals, which we know when we usually talk about sports. There are fixed rules, there is a way of using them, and these rules are not necessarily those defined by the athletes, by the activists, but they are defined On the one hand, by those who have the power, market, politicians, or whatsoever, in the extreme with corruption and bribery and violence. But there are as well learned rules. Rituals here, it's a definition from Pierre Bourdieu. What I think, as I said, there is this point of social capital in another way as well, that we find something that what I want to call social capitalization. Meaning, social capital plays increasingly a role in our societies, meaning replacing or redefining the traditional ways of interaction. It is about more collective orientations. It is about looking for sense, for meaning, but not only as individuals, together with others, and looking at something where we can compensate for the passivization we find in many instances. Looking at sports, we have these different dimensions of, when we talk about social capitalization, the collectivist orientation, sport oriented on extraordinariness and competitiveness. We have to be the best. If I sometimes watch sports or read something on sports, I think it's ridiculous to qualify somebody who is a tiny part of a second faster than somebody else. We cannot see it. We cannot see really who crossed first the line, but the watch sees it. At the same time, we have many sports areas that are oriented on harmony, on integrity. And I think, as I said, I don't like these qualifications or classifications, but this is as well, to some extent at least, a tension between East and West, where we have a more collective orientation in the East, whatever it is, East, Asia, take whichever term you want. And we have this orientation, which is a political orientation here now as well, the harmonious society. All concepts that can be contested or that can be discussed and that can be filled with different content. I think we find in many, or we can define accordingly, this is technology, it doesn't work. We can qualify different kinds of sports along these lines. You should see something now on board games, on classical martial arts, on individual training, on collective training, team sports, individual competitive sports, and explicitly nature-oriented or related sports. I think this is a very important point, that in any case, whenever we are active in sports activities, we are dealing as well with positioning ourselves towards nature, to our own abilities, what can we do, what are we able, and be it the disabled sports activities, Special Olympics or whatsoever. This is as well, I am not the norm, the previous norm, but I am well able to do something that nobody expected me to be able to do 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. These people had been locked up, literally, and in some areas of this world they are still locked up. So this is one area where we see as well this importance of relating to ourselves as part of nature. I think this is an important point. As part of nature in a given society, and with this we shape actually societies. We have now, of course, a problem that all this takes place in a tension that on the one hand we have new developments and they are taken up, they are integrated then in the mainstream. These so-called trend sports, developing something new, proposing something new, and rejecting actually the traditional activities. And then you see 1 year later there is a market for this and that you transport. So of course we are dealing with this tension. And then we have as well this problem of self-invention. On the one hand, we want to present ourselves as unique in many areas of new sports especially, and at the same time we can do only if we compare ourselves with others. So I'm coming from a background, we are talking in a certain international association about this, so-called social quality, where we work with two tensions. The one is the system, the institutional systems, and the other is communities and peer groups and people simply interacting. This would be communities in their immediate environment. And then we have the biographical development and the societal development as a second tension line. Within, or as on the crossing point of these two tensions, we find actually this development of how do we define ourselves within this wider framework. How do we define ourselves in relation to others, but as well in terms of in relation to the built-up and natural environment. Urbanization is part of it. The urban space is our environment. It's not only about trees and nice flowers, even if you find remarkably well-developed areas, I think, here in Chinese cities. Now, there is something else. Technology, I don't know why this actually doesn't show up. I think what the relevant areas here, I use another computer, that's the problem. The relevant points here are that we have a definition of as group members, individuals being part of their group, whatever it is, and the tension then at the other extreme, the orientation on the nation state. It is not about nationalism, but it is about national culture. It may be actually cultures in terms of the province and not the nation state, or even a smaller community. And then we have increasingly the importance of cosmopolitical space, westernization. At the same time, what we usually don't see here, you have the easternization in many Western countries. The orientation towards Asia and thinking this is extremely important as well for us to adapt. I think this is an important point, and this means as well that we are dealing again with a certain perception of our understanding of what nature is, what environment is. We relate to this every time we do anything, and this means in particular here now when we are active in the area of sports. It's a little bit taking the fun out of it, because if you ask athletes, they just say, in the ideal case, we just do it for fun. Of course, this is the core of it, but the fun is living in a society and living in an environment. So what plays a role as factors of inclusion are these four, now you can see it again, it's including and excluding power networks. We are dealing with power networks. Going back to Bourdieu, going back to Elias and others, talking about this, expanding on this. It is not simply an area where inclusion is taking place without power. It is directional inclusion, what I call directional inclusion, in terms of, we find two alternatives. The one can be, I include you, meaning kind of oppressive approach, or it is something I want to include, I want to be part of the larger entity. And it's always meaning in sociological terms, the relating to somebody else, to others. Team sports, small teams, larger teams, competition. This is this ego-alter relationship, and then it is with this, or coming from here, the mode of association. The way of how we organize sports, the way of how we actually manage sports as well. The two famous Western orientations here, in terms of the words, Panem et Circenses, bread and games, from the ancient times, and the other is mens sana in corpore sano, meaning a healthy body in the healthy spirit, and spirit in the healthy body. Now you find this on the one hand in the Western painting or drawing from Da Vinci, and you find it as well here in the Asian region as a yin-yang principle. You find this strive for harmony, body and spirit, body and intellect, and the way of you have to work on the one hand, but at the same time there is as well something you have to or you should enjoy it. It is about what I said, having with this foundation to say with all these activities that are necessary on the one hand for societies to build up and to stabilize societies, and at the same time to define inclusion, we can say it is a matter of society being challenged not to enter competition with other societies, but to provide spaces for people where they can engage. There are many areas, I think, where this actually happens. But this is usually seen more or less as play, as something we shouldn't take too serious. And then it shifts then later, if you go from school sports, it shifts very easily to competition. It's not about you have to take part, but you should be better than the other. It's dissolving the groups, dissolving the communities in order to be competitive. And then, of course, we end up with finally competitions between nation states. Money involved, business involved. Actually, this stopped me at some stage to say I'm not interested anymore in following this up. I can read the Financial Times, I don't have to read the sports news. It's more about business anyway. Actually, Paul, I always have problems with the pronunciation of the Chinese name, and Van Hong stated this in terms of there is a trend away from the nation state, from the orientation on the national orientation, towards recognizing actually the needs of people, the wants of people here in China, where management is about increasingly an inclusive strategy to recognize at least the wants and needs of people. Not in terms of competition, but in terms of something else. Now it's a little bit a pity that technology doesn't work, even in a globalized world. What I say, there are 4 different perspectives which we can take when it comes to sport and social inclusion, Exclusion. We have, taking Norbert Elias, we have this global and secular process of what he calls civilization. Of course, a complex field, and we can discuss it, but it's what he says, it's a secular process. At the same time, we have, and then I refer to Pierre Bourdieu, we have distinction. We have on the one hand society building, and then we come to the next step, dividing in societies. It is middle class, upper class, middle class, lower class, working class, unemployed. There are different distinctions. And they matter, of course, as well when it comes to our behavior. If this fails, we can go to Adorno. It's not simply an eclectic combination of theories, but then we have this oppressive sport of forcing people actually take part, and that means you are included. Now there is another way, and you can refer to different people in terms of theory there, Hannah Arendt, Adorno, the Frankfurt School in sociology. It is about people looking for opportunities that are there. I did not say in the introduction, talking about inclusion, exclusion is a little bit awkward, because we are talking here on a relatively abstract level about it. At the same time, we have to think, of course, about those people, for instance, who cannot afford any participation. They don't have the means. They don't have the education means, financial means, or whatever. At the same time, we find a perverse wealth on this world. I came recently across something, no, I hope you are sitting safe, somebody collecting Ferraris. He has already 50. And it's not the normal Ferrari, but they have to have some fancy features. So this kind of wealth, if we contrast this, we see in our societies there is as well a huge potential in terms of material resources, in terms of education. If we look at the increasing education levels, we have these potentials of activating people and allowing them to make use of these potentials in terms of activating themselves. Now, on the one hand, it can be a process that simply takes place from below. At the same time, I think it has to be a process that comes from different sides. Meaning, I can turn around as well the famous scheme from Talcott Parsons. He says every society needs adaptation, goal attainment, latency, and integration. This is usually what he says the society has to offer. Now I can turn it around as well and say every individual citizen can claim society has to adapt at least to some extent. Disabled sport is a typical example where society has to change. When it comes to gender, I think it's a typical example as well, where women claim their rights, which have been denied for a long time. Goal attainment. What is goal attainment? Is it only the goal attainment of a competitive, highly competitive society, or is it as well the goal attainment of people being able to develop themselves? Latency. We can have short-term effects, successes, and we have them in sports in particular, but what happens to these people after their career, which may last for 5 years, if it's long? And integration, as understood here as inclusion, is as well something where it is about building a sustainable long-term relationship that needs, of course, a managed framework, but that needs as well something more in terms of sound basis that can last. I don't think it's purely idealism, although there is, of course, some idealism connected with it. Just briefly, the traditional pattern is a given society with a specific stratification, a fixed understanding of social roles, and the acceptance of attributed roles and positions. This is our society, you belong there, within this society, and just accept it. I think we should try to think further, as well as sports managers, as well analyzing the history of sports. Isn't there as well a potential that gives more and more people, this is important, more and more people the opportunity going beyond this to say, this is not a given society. And it is not a given society. We have today a global society, whatever this means, of course, and we have to shape it. Specific stratification, of course, we have still the old stratification patterns, but at the same time, we have new patterns developing. You can relate this to all other points. We redefine roles with a huge danger that we end up in patchwork settings, in patchwork biographies. But we may take this, and I come to the end now, we may take this and going back not as far as to the ancient society, but as Friedrich Schiller, sorry for referring to the West and to Germany, one of my roots, man only plays when in the full meaning of the word he is man. And of course it's about men and not about women. That was at the time something taken for granted. And he is only completely a man when he plays. Meaning, we have to look at this space where we can actually control our existence independent of this material force. Independent of, not completely independent of the given forces, given structures, but in terms of spaces. I think this is an important challenge, and I don't like to end with answers. This is an important challenge when it comes to inclusion, exclusion in urban spaces. Because it's a matter of architecture, of regional planning or space planning, but it's as well a matter for organizing as well urban spaces in a way that they allow people to find areas where they can develop. There was at one question to the first presentation. I'm not authorized to add an answer, but I think it would be possibly as well an interesting topic. You mentioned comparative studies. I know, having lived in Sweden as well, there are areas where you have communal spaces, where people can activate, where they can be active in their own terms. I'm not long enough here in China to see, at least on the campus, where students can be active, do their own things. I don't know, at least they are very active in Shanghai in terms of sports, which I think is great. As long as they don't force me to be at 6 o'clock and go with them. The other thing is comparative studies, but as well the challenge to look not only at the still very important issues of, let's say, official sports, the mainstream sports, but as well at including the history of alternative sports movement. There had been these sports movements from below, which have been very much emancipative movements, which have been claiming their rights. And you find this today as well, at least as a counterpart in many areas, where even the consumption of sports is politicized from below, that people say, we are against violence, hooliganism, we are engaging for peace, and this is our aim. How to combine it is, of course, another challenge, but I think it is worthwhile to think about it, and that's my invitation to you. Thank you.